Hello. We are going to read from part 2 of Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. We are going to begin with chapter 3 and let's see how far we can get. Okay, so take a deep breath in and exhale. And let's begin. Chapter 3. The cellar was large, dungeon-like room below the kitchen. At one time, the walls had been whitewashed, but the paint was spotty and the old bricks showed through. Above, a ground-level window let in a shaft of light. Cupboards lined the back. A narrow wooden table sat in the center of the room, its benches pushed against a side wall. "Least it's cool down here," said Frankie. Mike sat on a bench and leaned against the bricks. Frankie sat next to him. "Sorry I bit him." Mike tousled his hair. "I'm not." Frankie stared at the padlocked cupboards. "What do you think's inside?" "Probably everything she ever took from a boy," said Mike. "Like the harmonicas Granny gave us?" "Like the harmonicas," said Mike. The first day they arrived, Pennyweather had confiscated them, saying if she let every boy have one, she'd be batty from all the noise. She dropped them into a box, never to be seen again. Frankie lay down on the bench, put his hands behind his head, and stared at the ceiling. "Tell me the story again." Mike didn't have to ask which one. There was only one story Frankie ever wanted. "It's your turn to tell," said Mike, knowing full well that Frankie would do most of the talking anyway. "Okay," said Frankie. "Our dad and mom lived in a town with a lumber mill." "Allentown," said Mike. "I'm telling, 'member?" said Frankie. "Allentown. When I was just a tiny baby, there was an accident at the mill and our dad died. Our mom brought us to Granny's house 'cause we didn't have any money and the lords were going to turn us out on the street." "Landlords," said Mike. "Yeah, so our mom got a job at the diner and we all lived together at Granny's and it was crowded." "And where was that?" asked Mike. "Philly. That's what the lads call Philadelphia for short. Philly." Mike nodded, remembering Granny's tiny third-floor apartment with its hand-printed sign propped up in her front window, "Piano Lessons." The upright was in the parlor, and while she taught, Mike had to stay in the bedroom and entertain Frankie. When it was warm enough and Frankie was napping, Mike took to the stoop outside, where he played the harmonica. Even then he could copy any song he heard on the radio. "And our mom sang to us," said Frankie, "every night. 'Twinkle, twinkle, little star,' 'Hush, little baby,' 'Are you sleeping?' Then our mom started getting sick with sumption." "Consumption," said Mike. "Yeah, and she coughed all the time and got skinny. And one day she went to the hospital, and even the doctors couldn't fix her. It was sad, 'cept I don't remember 'cause I was only 2. But you remember 'cause you were 6. "Yes, I do," whispered Mike. Granny had been giving a piano lesson to Mary Beth Flanagan from across the hall. When Mary Beth had finished her piece, "America the Beautiful," Granny shook her head and said, "Maribeth, I'd jump for joy if you'd learn to play that piece proper, and put a little of your heart and soul into it. Practice this week and come back and make me proud." At that moment, his mother walked in from work at the diner, looked from Granny to Mary Beth Flanagan to Mike, and fainted. When she came to, Granny ran to get help. Then she took Mama to the hospital while Mrs. Flanagan sat with Mike and Frankie. Only Granny came home. Day after day, Mike had stood at the front window, watching for his mother. Granny would gently pull him away, but he'd wander back, like a homing pigeon rooted to one post. It seemed there'd be no minutes or hours, just one long day of searching out that window and waiting. One long day that lasted 2 weeks, until Granny told him his mother hadn't been strong enough for this world. What other world was there? And where was it? After that, Granny tried to interest him in storybooks and games, but nothing worked until she sat next to him at her piano. As she taught lesson after lesson, Mike stayed at her side, his new perch, watching other children's fingers on the keys and listening to the metronome tick. One day, between students, Granny had left him sitting on the piano bench. He reached out toward the keyboard, placing his fingers as he'd seen the others do, and pressed. But instead of a harmonious chord, it was jarring and painful sounds, as if his sadness had traveled from his fingers onto the keys, and the sounds repeated the awfulness he felt inside. With his fingers wide, he pounded the keys over and over and over as the room filled with his grief. When Granny came back into the room and she saw his wrenched face and his wild hands hammering away, she sank into a chair, all the while crying herself. That evening, she started teaching him proper. Each time he learned a song, it seemed that it mirrored his sorrow and anger and love. Granny said he had a God-given gift for music. Secretly, he thought his mother must have sent the gift so that she could hear him playing from the other world. Sometimes he imagined her humming along. "Mike, are you listening?" Frankie sat up on the bench in the cellar and shook his arm. "Yeah, I'm listening." "Granny took care of us and loved us." "Yes, she did," said Mike. "We didn't have a lot, but we always had her." Things had been difficult the last few years they'd lived with Granny. So many people were out of work. Piano lessons became luxury for few could afford. Granny's students dwindled to a small handful, and even those families often paid with food or used jacket for Mike or Frankie instead of money. Most months, Granny just squeaked by with rent. Even so, weather permitting, every Sunday afternoon, she threw open the front window, and she and Mike took turns playing the piano for the entire neighborhood. Brahms, Chopin, Mozart, Debussy. She said people on hard times deserved to have beauty in their lives as much as anyone else, whether or not they could pay their rent or walking to the breadline. Granny said that just because someone was poor didn't mean they were poor of heart. Then, when Granny got too old and delicate to take care of us anymore, she brought us to Bishop's because it was the only place with a piano, said Frankie. Mike closed his eyes. He could still see Granny standing in Pennyweather's office with a nurse at her side. Withered and trembling, she had hugged them one last time. Her voice wavered. "Be my sweet boys, and promise to take care of each other. The right parson will come and want 2 fine boys. I know it in my soul." The cellar seemed to close in on Mike. "That's right, Frankie," he said, pushing tears from his cheek. "She chose Bishop's because it had a piano." "And then Granny went to the old folks' home and she died," said Frankie. "I miss her." Mike put his arm around him. "And that's the end of the story." "Nah, it's not the end," said Mike. "There's more. Remember? Someday we'll get away from Bishop's and go to, come on, you're telling the story." "New York City," said Frankie, waving his arms in an arc. "The Big Apple. Granny went there to visit and she loved it." "We're going to live there," said Mike. It's going to be our city. We're gonna take a train and get all fancied up and go to a concert at Carnegie Hall, just like Granny did, said Frankie. That's right, said Mike. She always wanted to take us there. There will be a big, shiny black piano, right? Said Frankie. And a famous piano player and an orchestra? Right, said Mike. The theater will be full, even the top balconies. Granny said the balconies are golden and the seats are red, and all the musicians are dressed in black. And at the end, let me say it, said Frankie. We will stand up and clap and yell, bravo, bravo. Mike nodded. He didn't tell Frankie that when he imagined the scene at Carnegie Hall, he didn't see himself in one of those plush red seats. He saw himself on stage in a black tuxedo, standing next to the piano and bowing to the audience. And after the concert, you and me will go to dinner at a restaurant and order roasted beef and ice cream. It won't be like here, right, Mike? Mike looked down at Frankie in his tattered clothes. He could hear the kid's stomach grumbling for dinner. No, I promise it won't be like here. Chapter 4. Dinner was long over when Pennyweather let them out of the cellar and sent Mike and Frankie to their dormitories. Most of the boys on Mike's floor were huddled around the radio, listening to Buck Rogers in the 25th century. They might have behaved at dinner for Mrs. Godfrey to give them porridge. Mike flopped down on his cot. Mouse, who was reading the funnies in a week's-old newspaper, sat up, pulled 2 apples and a hunk of bread from behind his pillow, and held them out. You only missed cream chicken, otherwise known as mystery gravy. I smuggled Frankie some food with his buddies. The little lads thought it was the most important mission of their lives. Hey, thanks, said Mike, taking the food and biting into an apple. Mouse was almost 16 and one of the oldest at Bishop's. Most of the boys didn't like him because he was Pennyweather's pet, but Mike thought him decent enough. His name was Stephen, but no one ever called him that. With his milky skin, pale eyes, and white hair buzzed so close to his head that pink scalp showed through, Mouse couldn't complain one bit about his nickname. Danny Moriarty was in the nurse's office next to the visitation room today, said Mouse. He heard what happened. You really punch a guy? Did Frankie bite him and draw blood? Mike nodded. My punch was more of a push, but Frankie left a set of teeth marks. Heard Pennyweather's going to put you out to hire. I'm not even close to 14, said Mike. Mouse shrugged. Wise up. Bishop's a work mill. You ain't been around this time of year before, but you'll see. Farmers are here first thing every morning taking us older boys for day work. If their farm is far away, they take us for weeks, then bring us back when the plowing or picking or stacking is finished. Our measly stipend goes to Pennyweather for clothes and school supplies. You see any school supplies or clothes? Why doesn't someone tell? Ain't no one to tell, said Mouse. Old man Bishop owns this place but lives in the city. Heard the cooks talking about how Pennyweather only has to deliver a certain amount of money to him each month to keep him happy. She pockets the rest. None of them dare say a word, with so many of their husbands skint and out of work. Can't afford to lose their jobs. Did Pennyweather really say she's getting rid of all the lowers and filling Bishops with Hathaway boys? Mike nodded. Uppers bring in the money. Lowers take up space. She's all business. Mouse chewed on his lip and nodded. That's going to make things difficult for me. I won't be one of the oldest anymore. Might be time. Mike frowned. I thought you had it good. Aren't you Pennyweather's He caught himself and closed his mouth. Pet, I admit it. I'm as nice as pie to Pennyweather, so she gives me privileges. What's wrong with that? Speaking of which, tomorrow morning I'm taking the wagon to make a delivery to Four Corners because the truck's broken down. She told me to get someone to go with me. Want to come? Be back by noon. Beats working for Otis, pulling weeds and rocks from his fields. One of the boys can let Frankie know. Mike studied the apple core. He hadn't been away from Bishop since the day they'd arrived. Plus, boys were never fostered out on the weekends, so Frankie wouldn't be called up. And the kid liked working at Otis's because at the end of the day, Mr. Otis pressed a penny into each boy's hand. Mike nodded. Yeah, I'll go. Before dawn, Mike and Mouse rode in the flatbed wagon down the long road leading away from Bishop's. On either side, cornfields walled in their view of everything but the green stalks and the gray sky. The air was cool, and the horses' clip-clopping was hypnotic. For a while, neither boy spoke. The morning brightened when the field stopped. The world opened up on the vast pastures. Sure is pretty, said Mouse, nudging Mike with his elbow. Anything is prettier than Bishop's. Mike nodded toward the back of the wagon bed. He and Mouse had carefully stacked a dozen boxes on top of an old quilt to pad the ride. What's inside anyway? Supposed to be a secret. But one time I came down to the cellar before Pennyweather had finished packing. The cupboards were open and filled to choking with canned peaches, plums, jams, you name it. Jars had labels on them that said Methodist Women's Auxiliary. You know those church ladies who show up at Bishop's every month? The smiling ones with the covered baskets, said Mike. Mouse nodded. They make pints of preserves for us poor orphans. Pennyweather changes the labels and sells them and pockets the money. One day I noticed a jar was missing, the sealing rings, so I asked if I could have it. Told her it wouldn't sell anyway and how I love peaches. That I always heard she was fair-minded. She let me eat the whole thing. So Pennyweather has a heart? Mouse nodded. Everybody has a heart. Sometimes you gotta work hard to find it. One thing I learned is that if there's something you want or need to know from grown folks, you gotta step up and ask for it mannerly. Plead your case. That's what I say. More times than not, you'll get exactly what you ask for. You know the saying, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar? If Granny had said it once, she'd said it 1,000 times. Means you get more by being nice and polite than being otherwise. That's right. Made my time at Bishop's more bearable, that's for sure. What do you want to do once you're out of here? Mike frowned. I can't think past getting Frankie settled. You tell Frankie what Pennyweather's up to? Mike shook his head. Didn't have it in me. Listen, said Mouse, you gotta keep Frankie out of the state home. Ain't fit for a river rat. Kids have lice and fleas. Last year it was quarantined because 2 boys died from a fever. Dead. Makes Bishop's look like the Biltmore Hotel. Next time he gets called up, you gotta make sure he goes. Pennyweather has to let you know where he is. It's the law. You can write him. Heard they even let brothers visit on holidays. Face it, you're confined to Bishop's till you're 18. But Frankie might have a chance to get out. Make a plan. You gotta have a plan. They passed a sign that said 4 Corners, 2 miles. Before the intersection of 2 lanes, Mouse stopped the horse and handed Mike the reins. Here's where I get off. I'm going on the lam. What? You're running away? Mike's thoughts raced. Hey, I don't want any trouble at Bishop's. Relax. Deliver the boxes to 4 Corners. Get the money and take it to Pennyweather. Tell her I took off and you couldn't stop me. She'll report me, but I'll be long gone before a truant officer can catch up. Besides, all she cares about is someone bringing back the dough. He jumped down from the seat. But where will you go? What will you do? Don't worry, got a plan. When I turn 18, I got 2 choices. U.S. Army or the Tree Army. The what? Civilian Conservation Corps. Lads call it Tree Army. It's part of the president's New Deal to get the country out of the sad slump we're in. It's jobs for young men like yours truly. I can work any number of places. Planting trees, stocking rivers with fish, building parks, get paid $35 a month too. I figure I'll do that for a year or so, until I've seen some of the U.S. of A. Then I'll join the military and see the world. No guy in the Marines told me there's always a war to fight somewhere in the world. What are you going to do until you turn 18? I'm almost 17. I can get by for a year. I got a friend who works at the train station in Philly. Can sneak me on without a ticket. Heading to New York City. I'll live on the streets. Done it before. I know the safe places to sleep, soup kitchens, even know how to sneak into Yankee games and theaters. Mouse grinned. Mike felt a tug at his heart. New York City. That was supposed to be his plan, too. His and Frankie's. Mouse climbed into the wagon bed and moved the boxes aside until he pulled the quilt from beneath them. He folded it like a jelly roll, tucked it under his arm, and jumped down. If you get Frankie sorted out and you want to join me, my friend at the station, his name is McAllister. Tell him I sent you. He'll get you on a train and tell you my usual whereabouts. Without looking back, Mouse walked away whistling. Mike sat in the wagon, watching him saunter down the road. He tried to imagine what it felt like to have no worries, to have nothing but a bedroll to carry and the wide world in front of you. There was something exciting about the idea of taking a train to the big city, sleeping who knows where, and sneaking into a theater. Mike would go with Mouse if it weren't for Frankie. On his own, he could make do with little. It would be so easy. Guilt squirmed into his thoughts. Be my sweet boys and promise to take care of each other. How could he even think of leaving Frankie? The kid loved Mike and Mike loved him. Mike shook his head, disgusted with himself. What kind of brother was he? Mouse disappeared over a rise in the road. Mike flicked the reins and the horse walked forward. Mouse was right. There was always a war somewhere in the world, and Mike had his own, fighting for Frankie. He made the delivery to Four Corners, collected the money, and drove back to Bishop's. The entire way he felt like a wild bird trapped in a house, swooping up and down and into the walls, wings flapping against the windows, trying to find a way out. Chapter 5. On Monday morning, Mike was startled from a nightmare about lice and fevers and fleas. He bolted upright in his cot, his heart pounding. Before he could lie back down, he heard Frankie's whistle. It could only mean one thing. As Mike scrambled from his cot, he heard Mouse's warning again. You gotta keep Frankie out of the state home. You gotta have a plan. If the kid was called up now, how would Mike convince him he had to go? By the time Mike reached the stairwell and opened the window, Frankie was already waiting on the tree limb to be let in. Mike helped him inside, put his hands on Frankie's shoulders, and said, Whatever happens, I'll figure something out. I promise, okay? Frankie shrugged. Okay, look! He reached into his waistband and pulled out a folded newspaper page. He dropped, cross-legged on the floor, opened it up, and smoothed the paper out flat. The headline ran across both pages. Hoxie's Harmonica Wizards. It's the biggest harmonica band you've ever seen. 60 boys! Mrs. Delancey read the article to us and let us listen on the radio last night. When she put the paper in the bin, I snuck back and took this page before anyone else could. Mike, there's nothing like 'em anywhere. You'd swear by the sound it was every kind of instrument, and not just harmonicas." Mike sank to the floor and leaned against the wall, blowing out a long breath. He nodded toward the newspaper. "Frankie, that is the emergency? Remember, we talked about using the signal only when it was very, very important." "Mike, look at them," said Frankie, tapping a photo that took up half the page. "Before he died, John Philip Sousa wrote him a special song called the Harmonica Wizard March. And once he even directed the band in concert. They played in parades and for 3 presidents." Frankie held up his fingers and ticked them off. "Coolidge, Hoover, and our very own Happy Days Are Here Again, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They even played for a queen. And that's no lie. Now, people call them the Harmonica Wizards, and—" "Take a breath, Frankie. You sound just like a radio announcer." Frankie looked down and chewed on his lip. "See, I can buy the official band harmonica if I have 65 cents, but I only saved up 23. Mike couldn't help but smile. "Frankie, last month you listened to the radio commercial for Wheaties and wanted the Lou Gehrig baseball card from the back of the box. Before that, it was a Buck Rogers planetary map." "Except I couldn't get those," said Frankie, "because you needed to buy something else first. To get the baseball card, you had to buy a box of Wheaties, and for the planetary map, you needed to buy a label from a can of cocoa malt. But for the harmonica, you don't need to get something else first. You can just order it. See?" "Frankie, what is so important about this that you had to whistle for me?" Frankie barely took a breath. "At the end of the summer, there's going to be a big contest with prizes. The top winners get a spot in the band. And if a boy gets into the band, he's on Easy Street. The director, Hoxie, pays for everything. Uniforms, new harmonicas, music lessons, you name it. They even have their own touring bus. And every summer, there's something called Camp Harmonica. All expenses paid." He pointed to the paper. "Ain't they swell? I bet we could get into that band." Mikey read the caption under the photograph. "Philadelphia Harmonica Band, led by Albert N. Hoxie, for boys ages 10 to 14. "Frankie, you're only 7. Frankie pointed to the boy in the photo in the front row. "He looks younger than me." Mikey leaned closer. Frankie was right. The boy looked to be about 5. "It lists him as a mascot performer. He's probably someone's little brother that plays decent and looks fine in the uniform." "You could try out. If you got in, then maybe they'll let me be the mascot." Mike shook his head. "You think Pennyweather is going to let me audition for a band?" "How do you plan to get anything delivered without her finding out? Plus, even if we got a harmonica, she isn't going to let us keep it. She took away our others first thing." "I already got that figured," said Frankie. "Lowers do mail duty every day. We go in 2s to the letterbox at the end of the lane, and then we deliver the mail to our office. Someone will grab it for me, and I'll hide it. You and me can take turns practicing when we're working in the fields where Pennyweather can't hear." Frankie tapped the paper. It says here, Hoxie even finds homes for kids who don't have families, if they're good enough for the band. See, we could run away, try out in August before September gets here." He stared at the paper, frowning. Mike felt a lump in his throat. He should have known Frankie would find out about Pennyweather's dead mine. At Bishop's, news was like water passed in a bucket brigade. "So, you heard about her getting rid of the Lowers to make room for Hathaway boys, and me being put out to hire?" Frankie looked up at Mike, his eyes solemn, and nodded. Mike put an arm around him. This band, that's good thinking, Frankie. He leaned over the paper and read the mail-in form next to the photograph. Honer Harmonica, the official instrument of harmonica wizards. You too can learn to be a musician. Instruction booklet included. He looked at Frankie. I've only got about 30 cents. We'll have to wait till we save up. Frankie handed the paper to Mike. Can you keep this and my money for me? Eddie, 2 beds down, likes to steal. He pulled a handful of pennies and nickels from his pocket. Sure, I'll take care of them. Mike helped him up. When Frankie had one leg over the sill, he turned to Mike. It was very important, Mike nodded. I know, kid. See you later. He watched Frankie climb out the window and waited until he heard the whistle that meant he was safely down. Mike went back to his room and sat on the edge of his cot, studying the fine print on the order form for the harmonica. Allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. He covered his face with his hands, rubbing his forehead. By the time he and Frankie saved up the money, mailed away for the harmonica, and waited for it to arrive, it would be too late. Frankie would be in the state home. Mike pulled a slim metal box from a slit in the seam of his mattress. He had found it one day, left by some boy who'd slept in the cot before him. Luckily, it had escaped all of Penny Weather's surprise inspections, where she confiscated anything the boys tried to keep. He slipped the newspaper and the coins inside, buried it again, and sighed. Why couldn't he and Frankie catch a break? Mike's eyes drifted to Mouse's empty cot. Mouse was surely in New York City by now. Maybe Mike and Frankie should run away too. They could find McAllister at the train station and meet up with Mouse. If Mike was smart about it, he could get them far enough away from Bishop's before Pennyweather reported them. But how? And when? Chapter 6. For the rest of the week, Mike fretted about their escape. 4 lowers had been fostered out within the last few days. Pennyweather was getting rid of the little lads like they were grocer's specials. 2 for the price of 1. How much time did Mike have? How far could they travel before Pennyweather became suspicious and reported them? What would happen if a truant officer caught up to them? The questions continued to weigh on Mike as he mopped the stairs on Friday afternoon. Mrs. Godfrey appeared below him in the entry. Michael, Mrs. Pennyweather wants you right quick in the dining hall. Your brother is already there. Mike dropped the mop and clambered down the stairs. Out of breath, he arrived in the dining hall to find a man in overalls packing up tools and Pennyweather wiping down the piano with lemon oil. 3 chairs had been positioned nearby in a straight line. Frankie sat on the piano bench, swinging his legs. Pennyweather looked up. Michael, please join your brother. He did, and Frankie leaned over and whispered, Pennyweather had the piano tuned. She wants us to play a song. Mike sighed and tried to calm his racing heart. Is that all? Frankie nodded. That's what she said. Frankie wasn't being fostered out? Mike couldn't decide if he was disappointed or relieved. The man closed his toolbox. All done? Mrs. Pennyweather, I fixed the pedals too. She's got a beautiful sound. You don't need to pay me. Anything for them orphan boys. Pennyweather smiled. I am so grateful for your kindness. When he was gone, she put her hands on her hips and faced Mike and Frankie. I have some men coming to look at the piano. They've asked if we have anyone here who's musical, so they can determine the quality. She shook her head. Don't know why they can't do it themselves. Regardless, you are the only ones who can play this noisemaker without pounding on it. The cooks told me you've been practicing some piece every night after dinner that makes them cry. Sentimental fools. So play that one, and make it sound just as good, or you'll both be back in the cellar. She turned and began polishing the lid. Frankie tugged on Mike's sleeve and whispered, But Granny picked her 'cause of the piano. Mike leaned forward to Frankie. Shh! Better we keep Pennyweather happy. Two men wearing suits with vests walked into the room. The taller, gray-haired man carried a briefcase.
Mrs. Pennyweather, I presume? I'm Mr. Golding, attorney at law, and this is my associate, Mr. Howard.
The younger man was the same height as Mike, fair-headed and freckled.
I'm also a family friend of the client. I've been given the authority to make a decision in the matter.
They removed their hats. Gentlemen, said Mrs. Pennyweather, nodding, pardon me, but I'm confused. Why do we need lawyers for this matter?
Mr. Golding frowned. Certainly, if we've come to an agreement, Mrs. Pennyweather, everything needs to be legal.
Pennyweather shrugged and looked puzzled. Well then, let's get on with it. Here are Michael and Franklin Flannery, our best musicians, like you asked.
Wonderful, said Mr. Golding. We'd like to hear them play.
Of course, said Pennyweather, sweeping her hand toward the chairs. Please sit down, gentlemen. Boys? Mike and Frankie slid around and faced the keyboard. America the Beautiful, whispered Mike. You come in after Amber Waves of Grain, just like I taught you. But at first, nice and slow, like a lullaby, until almost the end. I know, said Frankie. Then like a storm until the shining sea part, and we make it all calm again. He poised his hands, ready. Mike began to play. After a few bars, he nodded to Frankie, who came in on cue. Mike couldn't believe this was the same piano. There were no sour notes, no avoiding a sharp, because it wasn't. The man was right. The piano had a beautiful tone. Mike filled up on the sound, as if he were eating something delicious, each bite better than the last. For a few moments, there was nothing but music. No worries, no Pennyweather, just him and Frankie. Mike could almost believe that he was back in Granny's parlor, playing on a Sunday afternoon, with the window open so everyone in the neighborhood could hear the music and have a little beauty in their lives. Mike used the damper pedal, and the chords filled the room. Before the last bars, he stopped playing altogether and let Frankie finish the song alone, simple and sweet. Mike glanced around the room. At the far end of the hall, the cooks had stepped from the kitchen and dabbing at their eyes. Uppers congregated at the windows and leaned on the sills. Lowers crowded the doorways, peeking in. Pennyweather furrowed her brow, as if she didn't believe what she was hearing. Mr. Golding raised an eyebrow at Mr. Howard. After Frankie played the last note, there was a long breath of silence. Then the lads began to clap and whistle until Pennyweather spun around and waved everyone out. Mike and Frankie shifted on the bench. Mr. Howard leaned forward. Michael, how old are you? 11, sir. How did you learn to play the piano? His voice was soft and kind. He nodded to Frankie. Our grandmother was a piano teacher. Mike's the best player I know, said Frankie. Mr. Howard smiled. And how old are you, Franklin? Everyone calls me Frankie. I'm 7, sir, almost 8. I'm the second best player I know. But Mike's a progeny. Mr. Howard smiled at his misuse of the word prodigy. You're right, Frankie. Very good. So are you. He looked at Mike. You arranged the piece? Yes, sir. That was quite beautiful. He cleared his throat. How long have you been here? 5 months and a few weeks, said Mike. We lived with Granny most of our lives until we came here. Granny picked here because it was the only orphanage with a piano, said Frankie. We gotta have a piano. Pennyweather clapped her hands to interrupt. Gentlemen, can we get back to business? Boys, you are dismissed. Actually, I would like them to stay, said Mr. Howard. Pennyweather pursed her lips. I don't see any reason, Mr. Golding interrupted.
Mrs. Pennyweather, our firm represents Eunice Dow Sturbridge. She is the daughter of Thomas Dow. Are you familiar with the name?"
"Who in Pennsylvania isn't?" said Pennyweather. "Mr. Dow was a businessman. Tire company, wasn't it? I read in the newspaper he died last year." Pennyweather crossed her arms. "What does he have to do with any of this?" "Now that Mr. Dow has passed, his daughter is without any family," said Mr. Howard. She'd like to adopt a child." Mrs. Pennyweather's eyes darted from one man to the other. "I thought you were here to buy the piano."
"Oh, heavens, no," said Mr. Golding, "and I apologize if our intention was misleading. We asked if you had a piano, and if there was a child here who was musical and who could play for us, so we could determine the quality of the musician. You see, it must be a child who is musical."
Mr. Howard nodded. "Mrs. Sturbridge is a pianist of great talent, so you understand the desire for a child with the same inclination. We'd like to start adoption proceedings today." And that's where we're stopping.